Welcome to episode 199 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. This episode is brought to you by Humanidei. Humanidei offers people operations solutions that build more inclusive credit unions through talent attraction, retention, and development. Humanidei helps credit unions win the war for talent and better serve their members and communities. Please check out Humanidei in the show notes. Today, I'm having a conversation with Cathie Mahon. Cathie is the president and CEO of Inclusiv and has been since 2012, and a return guest to the show. I actually had to Google it and look back. She was on episode 77 way back in 2020. So we're at 199 now. Cathie, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Randy. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited for this conversation. Before we really jump into it, for those who don't know you, could you give us a little bit of background on where your career journey began and how it brought you to where you are at Inclusiv today?
Absolutely. So I started my journey with credit unions over 30 years ago. I'm hesitant to say I actually started as an intern at the Self-Help Credit Union down in Durham, North Carolina. And prior to that, I'd been doing some community organizing work around immigrants' rights and civil rights in Los Angeles. And I had been there during the LA riots. And there was in the aftermath of the riots, there was a lot of talk about economic engines of growth and ways in which communities that had been sort of left behind could be re-engaged. And so there was some credit union organizing that got started then. And I wanted to learn more about that. So I did some interning at Self-Help Credit Union and got started on my path. I then later ended up at the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions, which was the name at the time for what is now Inclusiv. And so I worked for several years there before I went off and did other things. I was a consultant for a while. I worked with a lot of different CDFIs. I worked with some funder groups and philanthropy. And then I ended up at the city of New York running something called the New York City Office of Financial Empowerment. And in that regard, I sort of worked a lot with credit unions to kind of help engage low-income New Yorkers to get into safe and responsible financial products and services. And a few years later, I went across the street back to what was then the Federation and have been leading Inclusiv for the last 12 years.
Amazing work. Before we get into the big question that I can't wait to talk to you about, that I'm so excited to get into those questions or conversation, I should say, is we were recently in Kenya and got to spend some time together with our friends over at SACCA. So when I think of you and others that were there as well, as a leader in the U.S. credit union community, why is it important for you to participate in something like SACCA Congress with our friend George over in Kenya or other places on the continent?
Oh, wow. Well, that was such an incredible experience, was it not? I think there's a couple of reasons why it's so important for those of us who are leaders in the U.S. movement to be able to step out and be able to get a better sense of the international global cooperative movement. Number one, I think it's just humbling to see how big our credit union community is worldwide. And I also think we can learn so much from the saving and credit co-ops that are all throughout Africa. So that conference, I think there was like 1,600 people there with representatives. It was quite
amazing. That's for sure. And the conversations to me were so inspiring as well. I've had a couple opportunities to go there, and every time I'm like, I leave inspired. One more kind of big picture question, and it's a two-parter. When you look at credit unions, obviously you work with credit unions from coast to coast. On the one side, what's the biggest challenges you see our industry facing today? And then on the flip side, let's keep it happy. What has you most excited?
Good. When I look at our movement, and I think particularly, at Inclusiv, we work with the part of the credit union movement that, those credit unions that have been organized or, have been specifically focusing on serving low income and underserved communities. And so I feel that, on the one hand, we deliver this kind of ideal democratic vehicle of being able to bring financial products and services really deep in communities. And there's a wide range of credit unions that do that, from very small all the way up to very large. And all of that range of credit unions can really create incredible impact. But I do sometimes worry that some of our deepest impact work is happening in small institutions that are what I like to call, maybe not necessarily call them small credit unions. I like to call them hyper local credit unions. They are really deep in their communities. And sometimes that creates a concern that, what's the future, the sustainability of these institutions. But I also worry sometimes regulators and others might be too quick to write them off and see a small credit union and think, oh, well, that can't be sustainable. In the end of the day, delivering safe products, delivering safe loans and taking in deposits can be done at all sizes. And so I do think sometimes we do need to take stock and think about what's the part of our movement that we need to be shoring up and supporting and ensuring endures in order to make sure that we can fulfill our promise of really reaching all Americans who need access to our services.
You mentioned something, and I'm going to apologize for my ignorance here if I'm completely wrong on this, but like a lot of the times when I think of CDFI credit unions, I do think of smaller credit unions, but like you said, there are bigger ones as well. Is there a reason or even a misconception on why more, and this is if I'm wrong, I apologize, you can correct me here, but like that more smaller credit unions get into CDFI, like become CDFI credit unions than the bigger ones? Like why are more not doing it, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's a great question, actually. And when I first started with the Federation back 30 years ago, or 25 years ago, community development credit unions were small. The kind of origins of the credit unions were that they had been organized in low-income communities with small depositors, and therefore kind of were naturally considered to be, if you serve low-income people, you're naturally going to be small. That has really changed over the past many years for two reasons. One is a lot of those small credit unions have grown. The business of serving low-income people, it's a missed market. And those institutions have actually grown at faster paces than others in their asset class by considerable amounts because they're reaching markets that nobody else is going after. So part of the reason why our asset size collectively has increased so much is those institutions have grown, but also more what we used to consider sort of traditionally mainstream credit unions that maybe had a large employee base or had, a single SEG began realizing that it was in their best interest to become community-wide. And oftentimes they realized that when becoming community-wide meant finding out where those markets are that aren't being served well and sort of doubling down on it. So we've seen a lot of large credit unions become CDFIs because they decided that's the best way to compete. That's where the need is and the opportunity and the demand is and the missed market. And so I think that part of what our job is at Inclusiv is to inspire everybody, whether or not you become a CDFI. To be a CDFI, it means 60% or more of your lending has to go to low-income people and communities. Not everybody wants to be at 60% or more.
Right.
But we kind of feel like our job is to encourage every credit union to want to find those missed markets in their fields of membership and realize that by doing more to reach those missed markets and to reach underserved people is actually the best growth strategy that they're going to find.
To me, it seems like there's many things, right? Like you've just laid out that it is a great growth strategy as well, but it also is a good story to tell when we're like, if we're talking about lobbying in Washington, in our states and stuff like that as well. Anyways, I could talk to you about this all day, but I actually what I wanted to get you on to talk about was Inclusiv's green lending program and the $1.87 billion with a B dollar grant from the EPA that you'll be passing out to credit unions here over the next few years. So could you tell us more about that. So I don't want to butcher how big this is and what happened. So I'm going to let you do that. But can tell us more about this, how this came about, and what impact will this have on our credit union movement and the communities we serve?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're at a truly transformational moment for sure. So I'll sort of say, just to sort of contextualize, in 2022, the Biden-Harris administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which had a whole range of initiatives and a whole range of tax credits and subsidies and supports to try to really help bring down the cost for Americans and also be able to boost sort of sort of investment in a greening economy. So there was a whole range of things in that package, but one of the pieces of it was something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which devoted $27 billion to creating a fund that would provide capital to do three kind of key things. The first is to reduce carbon emissions across the board. The second was to make sure that the transition to a cleaner, greener economy was felt equitably. So to make sure that that investment got out in low income and disadvantaged communities. And the third was to invest in projects that wouldn't otherwise be done and leveraging private capital to do so. So that $27 billion was spread out over three programs. One was called Solar for All for $7 billion. And that went mostly to state and local governments to be doing sort of really big investments around solar. The other two programs, one was called the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, and that had a total pool of $6 billion. And then there's something called the National Clean Investment Fund for $14 billion. So Inclusiv took a look at all that. We also had been really active in getting that piece of legislation included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we had a real plan to focus on the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. That is a program, it's $6 billion, and the goal of it is to pass dollars through to community-based lenders to help build their capacity to be lending for clean energy projects in their communities. 100% of those projects have to go to low-income and disadvantaged communities. Right. So we applied because we know that credit unions are some of the deepest lenders. They're some of the highest impact lenders in our country. And so we applied to be kind of that pass through, to be able to be channeling those dollars. We got $1.87 billion. And we're going to act like a giant kind of like, I like to call it like we're going to be a giant endowment with a rapid spend down. Yeah. So we have $1.87 billion and 6 years to both get those dollars out, but also to be supporting the credit unions who we invest in to be launching a whole range of clean energy products and services to help their members be able to benefit from a greening economy.
So let me ask you this, and I didn't even have this in my notes to ask you, but I was thinking about it when we were talking, and I think it was something that you and I talked about like one morning when we were having breakfast in Kenya as well, was to me there was this, and I hope this doesn't get us into trouble, but it was refreshing in Africa that the climate discussion didn't sound political. It was something that from all these different countries, there were, I think, 30-some countries represented. There was nothing blue or red about it. That hasn't seemed to be the case where we live. So, like, how, as credit unions, I guess, like, the next question that I had written down was, like, how do credit unions get involved in this program? Which we obviously can talk about the logistics there. But also, I think when you're talking about credit unions from all over the United States, if they're worried about that somehow this is a political discussion, which, you know what I mean? Like, any thoughts that you've put into that and conversations to have?
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of our job to depoliticize this. When we think about what this is going to enable credit unions to do in their communities and with their members, yes, the ultimate goal for EPA is reducing carbon emissions. But the goal, yeah, exactly, for all of us it should be. But for credit unions and messaging in your communities and to your members, it's also about how are we helping to reduce energy cost burden. Yeah. So we have all experienced an increase in the cost of energy. Fossil fuel costs have gone up. gas has gone up, even electricity has gone up. So one of the things that we like to think about this is going to be an opportunity for us to bring in a broader lens that's like a financial health lens for our members and say, we need to get a handle on the ability for low and moderate income households to be able to manage their fuel costs. Yeah. And one of the ways to do that is to look at how energy efficient is their home? What does their transportation costs look like as far as, fuel and being able to afford their commutes? If you run a small business, what is your business? How much of your business overhead is going for energy inefficiencies? And so our job really is to work within the credit union space the same way we always do, which is engaging members where they are and saying, we want to help you bring down the costs of running your house, managing your transportation, or running your business. And that's going to be, in some cases, can we help with greater insulation, better windows? Can we help think about, transitioning from, typical AC and a furnace to a heat pump that could be managing in a more cost-effective way the heating and cooling of the home? And can we get to a conversation where maybe some of your own energy could be generated through solar panels?
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is really, I think when we apply it with that lens, it's going to be important. And I think the other lens to sort of be applying is we're all experiencing climate or weather related events in one form or another.
Absolutely.
And we need to be more resilient, because the number one kicker for whether it's loss of life or health or economic destruction is not just the damage that a storm or a climate event might be doing to you or your household, but it's sometimes the days, the weeks, or months of lost power that can really be negatively impacting households. So we need to be more resilient and more prepared. Our credit unions need to be more resilient and prepared so that we can operate with the ability to generate our own power. And we need to kind of be thinking about that planning for our members as well.
Absolutely. How do credit unions get involved in this?
Yeah, so we are just kicking off. So we spent the last 6 months kind of negotiating, kind of the terms of the award and working through a lot of details with EPA. And we've been able to now transition to being able to release the outline of our program. Mid-October, we were able to release kind of like our framework for how we're going to be implementing this grant program. The $1.87 billion, 90% of it will go out in direct grants, capitalization grants, or technical assistance grants to credit unions. Credit unions can apply for up to $10 million in capitalization grants and up to $1 million in technical assistance grants. And because there's a wide spectrum of size of credit unions that we hope to get into this, we're expecting that the average grant size is going to be somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million. Wow. And we hope to reach as many as 400 credit unions around the country. So we are soon, on November 19th, we will have launched our pre-qualification form, which will allow credit unions to kind of identify whether or not they're eligible. And the eligibility is pretty straightforward. Are you a credit union operating in the U.S.? And do you have a desire and a focus and a commitment to implementing a green lending program? And then we're going to ask you a number of questions to kind of get a sense of how well equipped are you currently to be able to be successful in implementing. And from that pre-qualification form, we're really going to encourage those folks who've gone through our training. We've been training credit unions for the last 5 years. So we've trained over 200 credit unions on green and solar lending. So if you've gone through the training and you have an active product, you can go right to the application phase. If you haven't gone through the training, then we're going to have you sign up to get trained free of charge. We're going to work you through the paces in those training programs. We really kind of, it's almost like design workshops where you're working with a peer group to design your product together. And each week you kind of present different kind of research that you're doing to put the product together. And then we're going to help you to launch it so that you can then apply and be able to get access to those grant funds. I want to make sure folks know, we're going to start slow. So the first couple groups, we're going to be making sort of small probably 25 to 30 credit unions at a time to be sort of bringing them on board. Partly that's to test our systems, and partly that's to sort of get a better sense of like, what does success look like? So we're going to encourage folks to have a lot of patience. There's not going to be a run on the bank. There's going to be 4 years for us to deploy it. So regardless of where you are in your thinking and planning, if you want to do this, we want to create a space for you to come on in and do it. So
we will link to all of everything we talk about in the show notes too, so people can get more information and they can read all about it. It's so exciting. I'm going to pause my one thought that I just had right now, because I would love to talk about how you have to ramp up for this. This is a big project for the next 4 years, but we'll get to that in a minute. The one thing that I wanted to talk about was, like, we've seen a lot of the pace of change, right? Like, keeps moving in credit unions and in the world in general. And the word disruption almost feels overused at times. When you think about this program, and whether it's I loved hearing about the training, because that makes it seems like it gives better chance for success with the dollars that are granted. I mean, how do you see a grant like this, like really moving credit unions forward in this world full of so much change?
Yes, I think there's going to be sort of 3 key areas, because the grant has to be 100% of it has to go towards low income and disadvantaged communities. We do spend a lot of time in the training program helping credit unions think not just about launching a green product, because basically any loan product that a credit union currently offers can be adopted to be clean or green, right? Like, so,
Right.
An appliance loan can be an Energy Star appliance, refrigerator or dishwasher or what have you. That would qualify, right? Your home improvement loans, your home equity loans, those can be adopted for specifically energy efficient purposes, and you'll be able to lend with the same basic kind of structures that you already have. So the real challenge is making sure that the products can reach low income and disadvantaged people and communities, and to do it in a way that leaves them better off. And so we do spend a lot of time in the training having folks do real deep market research on what does the typical household look like? How many of your members are homeowners versus renters? Because your products are going to look different for homeowners versus renters. What are the kinds of economic constraints that your members are already facing? And then we spend some time on thinking about what else is going on in the local community that might offer supports, subsidies, and other ways of leading a consumer, a member towards success. So, what we hope is this capital will be used to be able to reduce risk to the credit union so that the interest rates could be very low, and maybe lengthening the terms and making sure that the repayment of the loan is in line with the energy cost savings we want that household to have.
Beautiful.
So it's kind of like that math problem, and so I think that's where a lot of the focus is really going to be, is trying to make sure that we are getting deep and that this ends up benefiting people and making them better off as a result. So
if we were to have this conversation 6 years from now, what does success look like?
Oh, wow. So 6 years from now, success will look, I will say we will have deployed this capital.
Yeah.
We will have hopefully leveraged, at least 3 or 4 to 1 of private capital in the form of deposits, in the form of social impact investments, but that we will have taken this $1.87 billion and made it closer to something like $10 billion of total investment that's going into specifically low income and disadvantaged communities. And then I would love to have seen this become something that sparks a real kind of cultural transformation, where every low income consumer and homeowner and renter can see themselves in this and can see how they're going to benefit from a cleaner, greener home, vehicle, and business and community. So,
in community.
Yeah.
I love that. I'd like to move on to some leadership questions. We did some version of these a few years back, but it's been a while. But I was thinking more about with what you're going to be going through over the next few years and what I'm sure you've been going through for the last 6 months. That's a whole lot of money and a whole lot of impact that you hope to have. And so you mentioned kind of rolling out slowly, asking for a little bit of patience, making sure your systems work. From a leadership perspective, what does that look like? I'm assuming that Inclusiv has to scale up fairly quickly to do this well, right? And efficiently.
We do. And we have been ramping up quite a bit. We have been hiring, and we made the decision as soon as we got notification of the award, we started investing first in our own infrastructure because we knew if we just hired a ton of new people to come in and run this program, it would potentially swallow it would be a question of sort of swallowing the host kind of thing, where we would not necessarily have been in a position to fully support a much bigger staff. So we did put some real focus on, beefing up our HR, our fiscal and finance departments, our legal. We created a legal department. We had been going with what I used to say, the kindness of strangers, our pro bono lawyers in New York who are fabulous, but we relied on a lot of pro bono legal help for many, many years and realized that we needed to be a little more professionalized that way. And we've kind of restructured and built up each one of our teams. What we really want to make sure is that this not be something that's just an adjunct to Inclusiv in our whole overall strategic kind of focus. So we've grown our network team, we've grown our capital team. And as you may remember, Randy, Inclusiv has always been both a network of community development credit unions as well as a CDFI intermediary that raises capital and invests in community development credit unions. So we really want to make sure that this becomes something that sort of lifts the entire focus of Inclusiv, and that we're able to still do great work like helping credit unions become CDFIs, help them access the CDFI fund, help them launch affordable home ownership program, help them launch small business lending programs, help them, do a range of things around reaching and serving low-income people through all of their products and services. So we kind of used it as a way to grow our core business first. Yep. And now we're really ramping up on bringing in a lot more folks on the clean energy team. So we all are going through a lot of changes, and it's hard, it's like we all have to learn how to manage at a different level.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Any surprises so far? Anything you've had to work on?
Well, I have to say, for me, I always think about, I sort of came through the ranks in the credit union space and even with, Inclusiv, having been at the Federation for years. So I've always been a hands-on leader. And I think from a leadership point of view, I have learned a lot in the last year or two to lift myself up, to not necessarily be expecting to be in on every decision and every choice, to make sure that, as we're bringing on new leaders, that we're bringing them into our culture as much as we're bringing them into our strategy, and really then setting them up for success to be able to be making their own decisions and kind of carrying forward with their work. So, some of us control freaks, that's not always so easy, but
it's right. Something we all have to learn and struggle with, I think. Just a quick question, and this is one that I've had in the podcast the last couple of years. I don't think I had it in there when you were on the last time, but I heard this in an interview on another podcast where the question was, they were basically asking Warren Buffett what his greatest investment of all time was, and he said Dale Carnegie courses. So not probably what people would have thought, right? But I love the question. If you think of where you are today in your career, what's the greatest investment that you've made, that one that you're like, I probably wouldn't be here today if I didn't do X?
Oh, wow. I would say I probably wouldn't be here today if I hadn't first learned about credit unions, because it did actually get me. I mean, I went deep in sort of learning the basics. I would also say, I spent many years on boards of credit unions, and that's the best investment I've ever made.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. When you're on the board, especially if you're on the board of a small credit union, you're reviewing financials every month. you're reviewing internal controls and like, not just the policies, but like how it's playing out in operations. You're going deep on a lot of really complex things. I think it helps me at where I am today and running Inclusiv. I have such a deep appreciation for just how hard a job it is to be running a financial institution that is
Absolutely.
a democratic. I mean, we have these beautiful democratic financial institutions, and sometimes we don't always appreciate that that is a really difficult job to not just like have it be compliant, have it be truly accountable to its community, responsive to its members, and innovative and forward looking. Like we put a lot on the credit unions to be able to carry it out. So I do feel very humbled always when I think about just how many hats credit union leaders wear every day.
I love that. As we mentioned in the beginning in the intro, you've been the CEO since 2012. So you've been in the seat for a bit, right? And I think from kind of that age perspective, you and I are in that similar group. So a lot of the books maybe we were brought up reading, some have aged well, some haven't, when it came to leadership stuff. But what do you think today, to end of 2024, going into 2025, crazy to think about, what makes a good CEO today or a leader in general?
I think what makes a good leader today is really listening. It's not always easy to do. And I sort of say it with a smile on my face because there's a lot of times when you're halfway through the planning you want to put in place.
Yep.
And you realize like the kinds of things that people have been cautioning you about at every step on the way, all of a sudden you realize, oh, I see. They were just trying to point out all the possible pitfalls that maybe I charged right over. So I do believe that, really listening and embracing counterfactuals a bit, like, when you're in the midst of trying to make change happen is really important. I think there's several areas that we charged into because I needed to get us moving in new directions and felt very passionate about it, that I probably would have benefited earlier on from like really listening to what people were kind of cautioning. So I feel like that's probably the best thing I've learned about leadership in the last 12 years.
I'm going to dig down that one a little bit more because that is something that I know I've struggled with is the idea that like, if I'm excited about something, like it's very easy just to run forward, right? Like, and I think of some initiatives that I've done where I look back and I'm like, probably could have killed that project a lot sooner than I did, right? Has there been anything that you've lived and learned along the way? Like we all talk about the successes and we love to talk about the successes, but we don't hit all home runs. That idea of, whether it's Inclusiv, whether it's a CDFI credit union or any credit union or CUInsight, we don't have unlimited resources. So how do you stop from throwing good money, energy, time after bad? And how do you kill the project appropriately?
Yeah. Well, I will say, I think the biggest area where I learned, where we dove into, and I don't regret that we dove into it, but in about 2014, when we started realizing like we needed to do something to support more community development credit unions to get onto kind of tech platforms that would help them scale. So I think the technology space is a space of endless opportunity and tremendous possible pitfalls. And I think when we first started down the pathway, we had like a lot of goals that we thought like one set of activities was going to accomplish all at once. Like we decided we wanted to sort of make investments in technology firms or maybe start our own technology firm that would provide the ability to do back office support and shared services for small credit unions that would help like growing and dynamic credit unions to kind of reach and serve low income people more easily, that would do like loan origination systems to dig deeper in communities. I mean, we had like a whole hodgepodge of things. And I think what we realized along the way is, and not that I think that the goals are not important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But we needed to kind of lower our expectations of what one single group could actually be accomplishing.
But you could, yeah.
And we weren't necessarily going to create the final solution for all small credit unions to be on a single back office shared services, because they all wanted to do slightly different things in their community and nobody could agree to common ground on that space. So I think what we realized is like we needed to figure out some lower hanging fruit and easier wins along the way that would make some progress without thinking that there's one giant solution out there. So that was a big one for us.
I'd love to ask you a question on communication. And you and I, as we've gotten further in our careers, we've had other friends who have become CEOs. And many times, even if they've went to board meetings before, the idea of suddenly you have 12 or 15 or 17 or 20 bosses instead of just one. But I'm thinking about with all the change that's going on in Inclusiv, exciting change, you have to communicate up as the CEO. You also have to make sure that everybody, not only the people that have been on the team for many years that you've been working with, but also new people you're communicating down. Any lived and learned thoughts on how to, as the CEO, kind of right there in the middle of everybody, how you make sure everybody's still on board with that vision, direction, and the strategic plan that you have in place?
Yeah. I mean, well, just identifying it like you just did, Randy, is like 50% of the battle, right? The reality is we're very fortunate that I have a really incredibly supportive board and a really cohesive team. But your point is exactly right. Like, it's fortunate, but it's also a lot of work to make sure that we are bringing along the board at every step of the way from the strategic level. And we do spend a lot of time with the board talking about, like, we need you guys out at the strategy level. We want you to see what we see coming down the pike. We want you to embrace it along with us. We want to lay out our plans for how we're going to address it. But we're also going to be asking you to take a step back from the details of implementation, because you can't make a detailed implementation plan with 15 different board members who have very different experiences. And so we've had a great board that really understands, like, their job is direction, vision, and support, and weighing in and checking in with me to see where to support. But they are very good at sort of saying, like, we're not going to get into the details of how you're implementing this. At the same level, we've really needed to bring the staff along. And this transition we're going through right now with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, because it's so big, there was a lot of anxiety in our staff that the work that they're doing, if it wasn't part of this big, exciting stuff, like, am I going to get lost? And so we spent a lot of time making sure that everybody across the organization is participating in different aspects of the work as we're putting it together. But that we're also regularly communicating. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is how we're doing it. And, we had some challenging all staff meetings where we had a lot of people going, like, wait a minute, what about this? What about that? And a lot of people were worried that we weren't going to have the internal infrastructure to support such a big project. And frankly, that's what helped us decide that, like, okay, the very first thing we're going to do is invest in our administrative structure.
Set the foundation, right? Like, internally.
Exactly. And that came from the staff. That's what they were worried about. What is this going to mean? How are we going to have this all happen with one HR person? Like, okay, well, we're going to have to build out.
It's a good question, right?
Or capacity,
I want to be respectful of your time. And before we kind of wrap up the show with some rapid fire questions, was there anything that you were hoping I was going to ask you today that I didn't?
No, I think we hit it all. I think, the only thing on the clean energy stuff I would just say is this is, I think you had asked it at the beginning, and I don't know if I fully answered it about, I do believe that this is transformational. I do believe that this is important kind of, at the national level and at the community level. But I think we're in a moment of real inflection for the credit union space. And I do believe that this kind of level of resources, to me, signals that we've been seen by policymakers. They see that we are solutions to social and economic challenges that they're trying to address. And I feel like we as credit unions, the more that we can continue to be reporting out, sharing our successes, letting folks know about not just, hey, we're credit unions and we're great, but what is it meaning on the ground? What are we seeing in our communities because of our presence in those communities? I feel like the more that we are telling the credit union story, this is going to be the first of many opportunities for the credit union movement to be more engaged in problem solving with resources in social and economic challenges for our country.
I love that so much. All right. So a few rapid fire questions. Your answers don't have to be rapid, but the questions will be. So, one of the things, and we kind of talked about this with the growth of the organization and balancing the communication between things, but like you mentioned those kind of us A-type personalities as we're building things, right? Like often that can come at the detriment of personal relationships as well. Anything that you've figured out along the way to kind of create that whole life, both inside and outside of work?
Yeah, that's the challenge, the work-life balance. I think right now it's a little bit more leaning on the more work, less life. But a lot of it is about building community through the work as well. And so I feel really fortunate that I actually love what we're doing and I love the people we're doing it with and I love the people in the movement. So I think there's a lot of benefits there. And I think throughout my career, I have tried to manage a balance of work life and family and make sure that, I'm remembering to come home and have some good dinners, hopefully some of them home cooked.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Do you remember who gave it to you?
Well, I will say one of the best pieces of advice I got from my executive coach when I told her my board wants me to have an executive coach, but I don't have time for it. And she said, our first job is to clear your calendar and give you more time back. So that was a big on the work front. That was clear your calendar, identify what's important, focus on what you need to do, and sort of clear the cobwebs a bit.
I was recently listening to an Audible book, and it was the Matthew McConaughey book, actually, Greenlight or whatever. But he said this line, and I actually stopped and wrote it down in Evernote because I was just walking at the time. But it was, when you can, before you say yes, ask if you want to. And it was like just so basic to me, but I was like, I love that so much. Like, do I really want to do that? But yeah, so
that is
when you were talking
pause.
about clearing space, I was like, ask that first question. Do you really want to? But anyways, is there a book either that you've recommended to people over time or that you're currently reading that you think people should check out?
So I think, I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I think things like Tipping Point and sort of understanding sort of social psychology is fascinating to me. I think it's really applicable when you think about so many areas of our work. Scarcity is another one. Yeah. And it really helps us kind of realize like what we need to do when our messages aren't getting through to people. Why is it and what's going on in their channels and what they're balancing in their minds. So.
All right. Last question. I have to ask it because I know for a fact I didn't ask it the last time you were on because it's my Chairman Harper question. Who plays Cathie in the movie or biopic of your life?
Can I say who I'd want to play?
Absolutely. That's the beauty of the question.
I don't know who would play Cathie in the biopic of my life. I'd love it to be someone like Meryl Streep.
That'd be amazing, right?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. As we wrap up, is there just like a final ask of our listeners and the people out there today?
Come to us. We've got everything is on our website as far as, on the inclusiv.org, and it's inclusive without the E, inclusiv.org. And we've got a whole section on CCIA and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So come check it out. We're going to be refreshing and revamping really the website every few weeks. So you'll always be able to get access to kind of current information. And we'll be doing we've really hit the road. So we're working with a lot of leagues and other credit union system partners to kind of make sure we're doing in-person events and reaching out.
I love it. I could have talked to you for hours about this. Thank you for doing this and being on the show again. I appreciate it. And like you said, we'll link to everything in the show notes, how they can get a hold of you, all the website stuff, all that good stuff. And with that, thank you, my friend. I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, Randy. This is so nice.
As I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, it is brought to you by our friends at Humanidei. Please check them out in the show notes. I appreciate their support to allow me to have this much fun bringing you these conversations. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on all your favorite podcast players. We're on them all. Also, if you're looking for one of the book mentioned, like what Cathie mentioned, like Scarcity, which is a great one if you haven't read it, you can Google the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read can be on its way from Amazon, or you can download it on Audible. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate each and every one of you for allowing me to have this much fun having these conversations. Be well, friends.